Okay, so welcome everyone. Lovely to see you. And this evening we have Tim Atkinson, who's going to give us a talk, the title of which is On a Scale of 1 to 10, a personal examination of language of pain. So you're involved in the patient voice organisation within the Pain Society, aren't you, Tim? So you speak on behalf as a sufferer of chronic pain and also
Yes,
representing other
yes.
people who suffer. So, okay. So you're also a writer, picture of the book on the back. Please make a note and get do the Amazon order after the webinar. Anyway, so without more ado, um, please go ahead, Tim. I don't know whether you want to start with your share screen or
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you. And yeah, good evening, everybody. It's great to see so many people here, although it's also a tiny little bit daunting to see so many august colleagues. But I will try and do the job with all the technical efficiency. Is that working? Is the screen
yeah,
okay?
very good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, okay, so I'll begin then. On a scale of 1 to 10, needs absolutely no explanation or introduction. Everybody knows what all that's about. But I just want to talk about the words we use to describe pain, the type of bridges we have to build as patients between ourselves and clinicians. And just at the end, perhaps, just talk briefly about one or two of the more creative ways that I've been involved in trying to communicate the language of pain over the last sort of year to 18 months. So, yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm just going to start by reading my book, a short extract. I'm not quite sure why oh, there we go. It is moved. There it is. It's called Where Does It Hurt? Which is fairly self-explanatory because along with kind of how much, those are the two questions that we are most commonly bombarded with, and which, as patients, we're most commonly baffled by. Uh, and it's one of the things that I do deal with in the book. So I'll just read this short extract first, just as a way of setting the scene. So I'm at a pain clinic, and the nurse is asking that very question. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how painful would you say your joints are today? These numbers are significant. Misunderstand the verbal numerical rating scale, VNRS, and you could end up in some very spaced out places, thanks to the opioids they might try to prescribe. But beware, describing your pain the wrong way can also be a big problem. Some studies have even shown that people who articulate their pain most clearly, rather than simply shout or scream, are actually less believable as far as the medical profession is concerned. The more you talk about it rationally, the more precisely you describe your pain and explain it calmly to others, the less likely you are to be believed, apparently. And asking for pain-killing drugs by name because you know they work is a real no-no. That's defined as drug-seeking behavior and is as likely to get you arrested as treated. Hence the conversations like the one we're having today. Hence pain scales like the one used at clinics like this one. They simplify something that might otherwise be impossibly complex. They objectify subjective feelings and they try to put a number on it. But that's where the problem begins. The difficulty I find in quantifying pain like this isn't all the usual stuff about comparing pain or accurately measuring it to something else. It's part macho, pain is for wimps, which it isn't, but which I probably am, and part a lack of knowing what exactly to compare it to. I mean, 10, unbearable, unendurable pain. I'd associate that in my imagination with an enforced visit to the Tower of London back in the days of Henry VIII, for example. Or, I don't know, being arrested by General Pinochet's hit squads in 1970s Chile. So, 2, I offer tentatively, like a nervous bidder at an auction. And the nurse stops writing and looks up. Okay, then I say 3. The problem is that the NRS-11 pain scale we're using classifies 3 as mild and no more than nagging or annoying, and not really strong enough to interfere with ADLs or activities of daily living. And I think after 20 years of chronic pain, I've got quite a high tolerance for it. I've had years of practice, but the constant daily pain I have isn't really that bad, not compared to the utter agony of, say, stubbing an arthritic toe. And if that's a 10, and believe me, it can be, interfering with a lot more than activities for daily living and virtually destroying my CAS or capacity to avoid swearing, as well as my ATRR or ability to remain rational, then my normal chronic background pain is probably only a 3 or at most a 4. It's more discomfort than pain as such, but it never goes away. It's not severe, but it's always there. And where do you put that on a scale of 1 to 10? The difficulty is when communicating these things becomes tricky, is that you can end up underplaying the situation. Words are powerful tools for defining how we feel and how we understand ourselves in the world. And it's been established for a long time that those with more words or a wider variety of concepts to describe and distinguish negative terms tend to be more flexible in dealing with problems. But words are also a bit of a mystery. Language seems to shape some of our experiences as much as it merely reports it or communicates it. What do these words actually do? And how do they acquire meaning? And how does having one and agreeing its meaning bring something extra to the situation? I'd like to introduce you, in case you've never heard of them before, to the Pidahan people of the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. They're the sole surviving subgroup of the Mura hunter-gatherer tribe, and they live on the banks, mainly on the banks of the Maisai River, and they're very successful as far as their tribe goes. They numbered about 800 individuals back in 2018 when the numbers had recovered after a bout of measles. What's really interesting about this tribe is their total isolation and the fact that until very recently, their language was completely unknown. The man in the picture there is a man called Daniel Everett, who's a linguist and also an evangelist who was sent to the tribe to learn their language, to codify it, to produce a dictionary for it, and then to translate the Bible into their language so that the tribe could be converted to Christianity. He found that not only impossible, but utterly and completely baffling and challenging. And as a result, he lost his faith. He didn't lose his faith in the tribe. He has a very good ongoing relationship with the tribe's people, still goes and spends up to 4 months a year with them, and is still working very hard on their on understanding their language. But as far as converting them to Christianity was concerned, it was impossible because the tribe have no gods and no words for supreme spirits. That's not all. They have no unique words for colors. There are no words for precise numbers. They just use words that mean more or less relative to whatever quantity they're dealing with. There's no history. beyond living memory. There's no precise word for the passing of time. Their language is completely unique as far as Western or even global understanding of language is concerned. Most people, from the linguistic perspective, seem to go along with the view of Noam Chomsky, who insists that language has certain universal grammar rules and that human beings are innately programmed to produce language, and that all global languages follow the same basic patterns. Well, no, the Pidahan tribe's language follows none of these patterns. And as a result, it completely shapes their concepts of the world and their own experience and place in it. They seem totally in the moment. There's only a very narrow sense of then and now, but nothing more. If you're in pain, you have pain, and you have it now. And the fact that you have it now seems entirely unrelated to having had it earlier. And in the minds of the Pidahan, whether or not you'll have it later. There's kind of no past or future tense in the language at all. As I said, Everett's the only Westerner who's ever got anywhere near to knowing and understanding the Pidahan language and their culture. But even he was puzzled for years by a word that he simply couldn't pin down using any of the grammatical and linguistic rules that he was using to transcribe their language. And the word he was constantly being tripped up by, but which was used commonly by the tribes people themselves, was jibipio. And he listened very carefully and found that it was sometimes used as a noun, it was sometimes a verb, and sometimes it was an adjective, and sometimes it was an adverb. It seemed to occur all over the place in the linguistic structures that he'd observed and recorded. And he eventually came to the conclusion that it referred to something that was simply coming in and out of direct, immediate experience. A person could get into their canoe and zibihio upriver or zibihio back again. And Everett referred to that as crossing the border between experience and non-experience, which is absolutely mind-blowing when you think about it, because it means that anything not here and now, anything not in the present, doesn't exist. It disappears from experience. And it only zipihos back into experience or back into the conscious realm when it reappears, literally before their eyes. I think Ludwig Wittgenstein would have found the Pidahan fascinating, because he was nothing if not himself fascinated by language and all its many implications. He said, and this fits very nicely with the Pidahan tribe, he said, and this is in his second great formulation of language theory, of linguistic theory. He did it twice, you know, he was such a wonderfully gifted and genius level philosopher that he didn't only solve the problem of linguistics twice and the meaning of language once, rather he did it twice. But his second formulation is the one that he left us with, and which he moved on to, and it's as I say, quite relevant to what I've just said about the Pidahan. He says basically that to imagine a language is to imagine a form of life. So it's what we do and who we are that gives meaning to the words we use. They don't refer to objects. They're not pictures, which is what he originally thought with the picture theory of language. They're not labels that are attached to concepts or objects in the world. The language attains its meaning because of what we do and how we use it. And the important thing to realize is that means if we can't speak of doubt, if we can't sort of meaningfully articulate a way in which we could negate a statement, even a simple statement like, you know, it's raining outside. Well, how do you prove it? You go out and you either get wet or you stay dry. You either unfurl your umbrella or you don't. If we can't speak of doubt, then actually we can't speak of knowledge either. Wittgenstein's really very, very firm on that point. It makes no sense to speak of knowledge when there is no way that we could doubt it. He develops this into what he calls the private language argument. I might just let that extract from Philosophical Investigations just stay up on the screen for people to read it for themselves. And then I'll just talk about it briefly. Okay. This is about how we think and talk about our inner lives and our feelings and therefore bodily sensations and ultimately, of course, therefore pain. But underpinning it all is the bigger question of what ultimately gives language its meaning and the nature of language itself. A language that refers to private entities. In other words, I'm in pain, I feel happy, I am bored, etc., etc. It's fairly straightforward. But the point is, the really crucial point is that the meaning of these kind of phrases has to be, for Wittgenstein, has to be public, not private. So they're expressions of a private sensation or a private feeling or a private emotion. But if they're meaningful, they have to have this important public dimension. So the principle is that the words that name an introspective state and nothing else, words that are only labels for what goes on inside our own heads and which nobody else understands, are no more than sounds. They're not words at all, and they don't mean anything. A bit later in the investigations, he tries to explain this by talking about a beetle in a box. He tries to make it a bit clearer by giving this sort of explanation. Suppose everybody has a box with what is known as a beetle in it. All they know is what's in their box. So far, so good. They can't see in anyone else's box. And although they all use the word beetle to refer to what's in their box and think that they can do the same for other people's boxes, the thing in the box has no place in the public language game. Why? Well, because there's no way of knowing what's in anyone else's box. And there's no way of knowing, even if there is anything in anyone else's box. So Wittgenstein's beetle in a box analogy suggests that we can never talk meaningfully about our own beetle, because the thing in the box, if it exists at all, is irrelevant to whatever else we might say about the beetle. If a word has any meaning at all, then it's not the name of an object or a sensation, it's the use we make of that word in the language game. And of course, Wittgenstein isn't talking about games like Scrabble or Monopoly. He's talking about the game of life. He's really eager to show it's actual use, it's day-to-day understandings, it's interpersonal communications that really give the words we use, the language we speak, its fundamental philosophical meaning. So the thing that's in each box is irrelevant to the shared public meaning of beetle. Its meaning is determined by the use people make of the term, not the private something hidden in the box. And that must be the same for pain, mustn't it? If Wittgenstein is to be believed, it must mean that our sensation is actually irrelevant to a large degree to the public meaning of the word pain, which is defined by our agreed use of the word. Wittgenstein is absolutely fundamental on this point. Language cannot be a private matter. It has to be a community activity. I don't think Wittgenstein's ruling out all private language. I mean, that would be going too far, I think, even for him. I think he's sort of setting up extremes in order to make his point appear as clear as he can make it. I think he is ruling out any private language that can only be judged by introspection alone. So unless it has some other external criteria, then the words or the phrases or the concepts are going to be meaningless. But if there were some other criteria for establishing whether the sensations were true or false, then they could be part of the language game again. Maybe something like neuroimaging, maybe something that reveals some inner physical state that matches the kind of personal language that we patients use when we're going on about the pain we're in, might add that crucial degree of meaning to the words we use. Well, it's a possibility, but I would kind of personally just urge a little caution at that point. There's no doubt that what we're talking about here is relevant and important, but whether it's the last word on the subject, no pun intended, is moot to say the least. To say the least, when the statement "I am in pain" is used, Wittgenstein is basically wanting to push us to the situation where the words replace a natural expression like "ah" or "ow" or "ouch" or something like that as an expression of pain, not a description of my inner life. Then those words can be meaningful, and you, as a physician, can infer certain things from them. But the language itself can't do any more about expressing my inner experience. I mean, after all, it doesn't make sense to say, "I know I am in pain," because you are, if you're saying that, unless you're lying. It's a behaviorist point of view as far as philosophical formulations go. So it's a theory of mind that explains what we do in terms of dispositions to act. So pain means you say certain things, you pull certain faces, you avoid certain dangers, you take certain meds, you go to the doctors, and so on and so forth. Wittgenstein finishes this little bit of the philosophical investigations that deals with pain by saying that pain is not something, but it is not nothing either. Pain is not something, but it is not nothing either, which begs a huge question in my mind, which is, what is it? And what can we do to express it? If the words are going to always fall short, and I think they are, and I'm not necessarily going to be advocating, to my dying breath, Wittgenstein's view of how words get their meaning. I think, there may be an awful lot more to be said on that subject before the end of time. But he's undoubtedly hit on something when he's pointing out this almost unbridgeable gulf between what I want to tell you as a chronic pain sufferer. And I think actually I should have mentioned earlier that this, as far as I'm concerned, does apply most specifically to chronic pain. I think with acute pain, we are talking of a more on a more simplistic and more easily understandable level. But going back to what I was saying earlier about my constant chronic pain and the fact that it doesn't really fit any of the numerical scale definitions that I'm always being given, because they seem to refer to they would seem to be easier to answer if you were talking about an acute pain, but they don't seem to have any concept of what it's like to have sort of the equivalent in pain terms of tinnitus, a constant low-grade annoyance, which on a scale of 1 to 10 ain't going to get much above 5. But the fact that it's 4 cannot be dismissed because it's always there and it never goes away. And it varies a bit as well. It does sometimes get worse. Anyway, if pain isn't a something, but it's not a nothing either, what is it? Louise Bourgeois has written that the subject of pain is the business that I'm in, to give meaning and shape to frustration and suffering. The existence of pain cannot be denied, she says. And for Bourgeois, the existence she gives it is the business she's in, because she's an artist. She's a ceramicist and a sculptor and a visual artist of great renown. She expresses, as many artists have, her inner state through the medium of art. Deborah Padfield, who some of you will have heard speak on this very subject at the last but one Rydal Hall retreat, says in the book of her project, pain requires a language which works on a more instinctual level than words. And one such language is visual language, with its ability to contact the unconscious in maker and viewer. And I think this is where we could make a bit of progress as far as that old tell me where it is on a scale of 1 to 10 is concerned. Maybe we should forget the words, and maybe you should forget the numbers, and maybe we should think about expressing pain in some way artistically. I'm not advocating everyone's clinic is suddenly turned into a creative arts session, but I am advocating that there's some serious work to be done. I've been involved in a couple of projects myself, one with the Trinity Laban University at the University of Greenwich, called The Language of Pain. That's Deborah Padfield's quote, the one I was reading a moment ago. And another with Brunel University. I'd like to share a couple of examples of those if I've got time, just in a moment. Joe Moran, who's a cultural historian, expresses this quite well as well in his book Shrinking Violets. And I'm not going to do the old death by PowerPoint technique of reading the quote that is there in front of you, but I think it is, again, just reinforcing this message that maybe there's a third way, and maybe it's this third way that we really need to think about, and in some way, shape, or form, try to systematize into a useful diagnostic tool. Because after all, we are talking about something, as Elaine Scarry so memorably puts it, which destroys language, destroys conventional language, and causes this reversion to the cries and groans of a sort of pre-linguistic existence. But conversely, when you actually can, in some way, bridge that communication gap, she says it's almost like having been permitted to be present at the birth of language itself. Now, the birth of language itself implies to me the rebirth of language, a new language and a new way of doing things, which again is why I'm keen just to leave you with a couple of things that that I did from some of these research projects. Here was one in which I was asked to artistically kind of represent me before my diagnosis. I make no great claims to my artistic abilities, but I can draw stick men, and I can choose colours, and I can make a man that looks as if he's moving comfortably, and he's on green. He's green for go. Following that, there was a that's not following that, is it? That's the same one. Just a second, everybody. Apologies for that. Right, here we go. Following that, we were asked to try and express the progress post-diagnosis of our chronic pain. And here's mine. I'm just going to let this one speak for itself. So there you have it. As I say, I think it speaks for itself. That particular project from Trinity Laban, under the supervision of Dr. Rebecca Stancliffe, is in sort of pre-publication at the moment, and as and when it is published, I will share the link with you. And I think I'm certainly very hopeful that many of you would find it interesting to read, and very stimulating, as I did as a patient member of the project. Slightly different project that was called The Language of Pain. Slightly different project that Brunel ran a couple of years ago. It was called The Story of Pain, and it was about trying to create a storyboard or a mood board. And there were a number of different options to do this, from sort of live action or scripted drama. People interpreted their condition by means of dance if they could, and I couldn't. But some people did something two-dimensional and artistic, like the pictures that you've just seen that I produced for a different project. But I chose to do a video sort of montage, which told a particular story of a consultation that I had a few years earlier, and contextualized it with some of the information that I've talked to you about tonight. And I think I'll let this be the last word as far as my input to this goes.
I'm in pain. Constant daily pain. It might not be unbearable, at least not always, but it's always there in the background, like a big black cloud on the horizon, threatening to rain on my parade. Where is it on a scale of 1 to 10? The consultant asks at every appointment. But how can I answer? What can I say? It's not 10 if 10 is being tortured by having your toenails torn out, or if 10 is being burnt at the stake as a witch or a heretic, or if 10 is the longest, most complicated and most painful labor and childbirth imaginable. Of course, my pain isn't that bad, but it never goes away. It's always there, 24/7. If pain is severe, it is brief, said the Stoics. If not, it can be borne. But what the hell do they know? What does anyone know? What can anyone know about the pain a person feels? How can you ever tell someone how much it hurts? I have named my pain and called it dog, said the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Is that a good idea? But how big is the dog? And how hungry is it? The writer Joanna Bork says, It's not that pain is hard to talk about, but that it's hard for others to listen. But the consultant wants to listen. He wants to know. It's just that I can't tell him. In her book, The Body in Pain, Harvard professor Elaine Scarry writes, physical pain does not simply resist language, it actively destroys it, bringing about an immediate reversion to the sounds and cries a human being makes before language is learned. I think Nietzsche's dog just barked. Perhaps he's hungry. My pain is a bit like that, like an unsatisfied hunger, not starvation, not malnourishment, not anorexia, bulimia, just a constant, low-level hunger. Can I tell him that? Will he understand that gnawing background sense of discomfort and be able to place that on his numerical scale? Of course not. There is an etiquette to being sick, says Anatoly Broyard. I need to play the game, adhere to the rules, stick to the script. There's a cup of tea in a light green cup and saucer sitting on the consultant's desk. Next to it is a small cake or biscuit, a madeleine. All this talk of hunger is distracting. He can see me looking. It's so tempting. And suddenly my stomach is rumbling. And he laughs. And I laugh. And immediately feel just a little bit better. After all, pain uses the same lines used by laughter, doesn't it?
Wow, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Okay, so just open up to the floor. If anybody want to start the chat?
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, Sarah, yeah, okay, and then Jonathan, yeah, okay.
Hi. Oh, sorry, I couldn't see other hands.
No, you're all right.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. That was brilliant. And I was just, in terms of the, that wonderful insight into the meaning of language, and obviously, if you have been brought up to understand pain in a certain way, would you say that as a clinician trying to understand your pain, there have been better ways for you as an experience of a therapeutic approach? Because of course we're all taught the pain scale, and there's an approach that people are taught, but often it's really that time and that inquiry, which is very open-ended, that I think sometimes yields more. Is there a consultation that you think has achieved more because of a certain communication approach, is what I'm trying to say, really, in terms of from your point of view?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think there have in the past, which have been very satisfying and have helped, both me and whichever healthcare professional I've been dealing with understand the situation. We're both in an awful lot better. It's often revolved around hitting the right metaphor. Until recently, until my attempts to try and think of it in non-verbal ways to try and communicate, and that, of course, is in its absolute infancy. I couldn't conceive of ever going to a consultation with a picture, with a photograph, as an answer to the question. So it has still revolved around words, but where somebody has been open to discussing it creatively and perhaps adapting or being open to different metaphors, like the one for hunger, for example, or like the one for tinnitus, both of which are have used as an attempt, inadequate as they both are, but as an attempt to try and help people to understand the nature of my own lived experience. It's where those kind of conversations have been allowed to develop and take on their own momentum that things have been most helpful. The depressing thing is, though, that it all does have to then still be pinned back. I've had some really wonderful, very enlightened discussions with really inspirational clinicians who have then still very apologetically said, well, I'm going to have to put a number on. And I get that. I don't want to kind of really chuck the baby out with the bathwater here. I do get that there has to be some, you guys love quantifying everything. And this is the great unquantifiable, but nevertheless, money that's spent on treatment has to be justified, or the effectiveness of drug regimes or other treatment regimes have to be evaluated. So I get that we do need to attach numbers, but I just think there is some element of understanding chronic pain and maybe moving the whole thing forward, which is going to need some quite radical overhaul if any real progress is going to be made. I mean, after all, the 10-point scale is fine, or the 5-point scale. I'm bombarded with different scales now, and I'm sometimes bombarded with absolutely unutterably patronizing little emojis, to tick, which again will work. None of this is bad inherently. None of this is stuff that I would like to see, abolished. I'm sure if it does some good for some people, that's brilliant. But I think there's a complexity to understanding chronic pain and to dealing with it effectively, which requires a degree of sophistication, which isn't obviously or often present.
I mean, I think obviously there's that element of just describing it, but then the lead into the therapeutic exchange, which is obviously somebody coming up with an idea as to how you're going to manage it better, and whether clearly, slightly more binary is which drug shall I use now, and it's a sort of pharmaceutical approach or a sort of interventional approach, a block, or a sort of something I'm going to do as a clinician. I suppose because as we've met at Rydal, and I suppose the tantalizing thing about how it's that toolbox of options that you hopefully can try and lay out there, and with regard to the hypnosis sort of options, it's teaching people that they might be able to use this or that, might work better for them, but maybe not for so and so. And it's that blend of different things at different times that can be used to manage things. Because, I mean, there's that extraordinary reality that somebody being shot in the chest usually doesn't feel pain. At the moment somebody's stabbed, they don't actually feel the pain. It's often that chronic, or aftermath, understanding effectively of an injury and the implications, and obviously the neural, process of shock wearing off, and maybe all of those sorts of different aspects that are very complex and changing, but clearly affect the mind's perception of something, noxious. And indeed that, tortures have been devised where it's a drip of water on a forehead. A drop of water on a forehead does not damage, but when it's unremitting, that is when the damage happens, and it becomes a torture, and it's all of those sorts of, I suppose, different panoplies of approaches that allow you both as a clinician and a patient to go away thinking, oh, maybe I've helped in some way, but it's not a one size fits all, and I suppose the diversity of different approaches means that maybe from a patient's point of view, you get shoved from pillar to post to see person after person, and there isn't a sort of conjoined formula that is handed out at once.
Okay. Jonathan, you want to speak, and then Weetai after Jonathan? You have to unmute, Jonathan. Unmute.
Tim, thank you. That was tremendous, and brilliant to see some philosophers brought to the philosophy and ethics meetings. I mean, Anatoly Broyard famously walked into his doctor's office and saw um, the Persian carpets, the beautiful paintings on the wall, the tasteful vintage oak desk, and the nice furniture, and thought, this is a man who I would trust with my body and my soul. And then the doctor met him and took him through to the room next door, which was a bland clinical space, and Broyard immediately sacked him. So I wonder whether you've ever sacked a pain consultant for not occupying the same metaphoric landscape as yourself, and not being able to have the kind of conversations about pain that you clearly relish. Because personally, I would. And I'm also, my second point, I'll be more brief, is that Wittgenstein also said, ask not what the words mean, but what they're being used for. And so language has many uses, but some is to convey the experience of pain, but some is in order to get to work with your interlocutor, your clinician. In other words, you have to, you give it a 10 because you need more painkillers. You give it a 5 because you don't want more opiates, but maybe you want something else, but you need them to know how bad it is. I also tell my students off right from the get-go, because they all ask patients how much it hurts on a scale of 1 to 10, whether they've got a stubbed toe or chronic pain or chronic migraines, and I hate it. I think it circumvents curiosity, and I insist that they replace a quantitative question with a series of qualitative kind of cue following kind of questions. So anyway, those are my immediate thoughts.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I mean, I can probably answer them both together. I've never been to deal with the first point first. I've never been in the luxurious position of having the opportunity to sack any medical professional of any description, because unfortunately I don't see the same ones very often. Whether that's just an accident of whether this is the experience of NHS patients all over the UK, I don't know, or whether it just happens to be particularly bad in my own little rural corner of the UK. I can't say, because I've only got that experience of it, but I've seen approximately 10 different rheumatologists, and the one that I'm now in 20 plus years of being treated, and the one I'm seeing now and have been seeing regularly for the last 3 years is still a locum, a very good locum. That can be an advantage, to go on to your second point, because it means that you do get it can be a great disadvantage, and the continuity of care and the need to keep repeating that narrative over and over again can be daunting and very frustrating, and shouldn't happen. But there can be advantages to it as well, because you do see different people, hear different things, and have different conversations. And although I've sort of stereotyped some of the conversations for the point that I was trying to make as being very negative, very quantitative, and very restrictive, some have been very open and broad-ranging, and it's those that have been not helpful necessarily in and of themselves, but in the context of the other sort of treatment and the other consultations that I've had have like moved me incrementally to a better place over. Sarah was saying something about earlier, like having a toolbox, a toolkit of resources as a patient. And I think that's the advantage. You can get that, going to different people and getting different opinions on the same problem can actually lead to you getting little different tricks and techniques that can help you deal with different aspects of it. Sarah mentioned hypnosis, for example. The hypnosis that we briefly experienced at Rydal Hall in the summer did wonders immediately for the lower back pain that I'd had, which is not related to my underlying condition, but which I'd had as a result of an earlier injury for a long time, and which was very annoying on the top of everything else, and it did the world of good. And so having these kind of having other resources at your disposal, other conversations to draw on, other ideas can be quite useful in itself. So I've not had to sack anybody, but I think I've probably benefited from the conveyor belt of professionals that I've that been. It's been like the generation game at times, what comes.
Okay, thank you. Witai?
Thank you, Tim. That was a fantastic talk, very stimulating. First of all, I think your experience of having to see so many consultants at different times, I don't feel is uncommon. As I in my last talk, I think that was the finding in my qualitative result in my PhD studies. So I somehow feel that as healthcare professionals, there must be something we can do about that. Number one. Number two, I love the use of metaphors. I use metaphors a lot in my work. Next question is, how do we get healthcare professionals to use metaphors to forward the way we describe our pain, not only in a physical sense, but in our psycho-emotional, spiritual pain? Because related to your physical pain, I want to hazard a guess that there's a lot of emotional pain associated with that physical pain, right? The frustrations, the anger, and all the other stuff that goes with it. The third point I want to make is that as a doctor yourself, when you are in consultation with other consultants and you're not getting the kind of things that you want out of your doctors, what do you do about that? I mean, you are going in as a patient, but at the same time, you're also a doctor yourself. So you're in kind of a very difficult situation. So I would love to hear the 3 points that I've made.
Just to correct the last point, I'm afraid I'm not. I can't claim any. I'm not a doctor, Witai, I'm afraid, and I'm glad I'm not, to be honest.
No, don't be afraid. Sorry, I misunderstand. I thought you were you're a medical doctor.
No,
okay.
I'm not a doctor of philosophy or a medical doctor, I'm afraid, but I am a teacher, and I've been a teacher for the last 30 odd years. And
apologies for misunderstanding
no,
that.
not at all, not at all. But I think I think that might go back to something you were saying earlier in the point you were making about using metaphors. It probably won't ever be the case where somebody, or if it is ever the case, it'll be a very rare example of it, and the person, both practitioner and patient, will be very lucky to have hit it on the nail, in one. I don't think it'd ever be the case where you'd ever get that perfect therapeutic dialogue going from one patient to one practitioner all the time from day one. I think it's a therapeutic relationship that makes that takes a time, and I know time is in very short supply for all medical practitioners, but I think there is also an abundance of research that shows, especially in sort of psychological interventions, that it's the therapeutic relationship more than the paradigm being explored that is, or the treatment being offered that is often the most beneficial in certainly in some situations. So I've lost myself. No, I was a teacher, wasn't I? That was what I was going to say. It's often the case in class that you've got to try and break difficult concepts down into very simple constituent parts. And the most powerful teaching tool anyone's got in the classroom is, coming across metaphors, comparisons that relate to the experience of the students in front of you. And that isn't always something that I, as an individual teacher, have the skills or life experience or knowledge or expertise to offer. But a colleague along the corridor might just, have the knack and have that spark of inspiration come into their minds in response to, the simplest of question. And I have that happen to me as well. Kids will come from lessons with, all sorts of questions about what they've just done or what they might not have understood. And it's no criticism of the fact that, the lesson's been delivered and will have been delivered well. But sometimes I can just look at it from a slightly different perspective and give the students that kind of penny drop of understanding that can be so difficult. I mean, it happens randomly and across all subjects. I teach philosophy and ethics, or have done, although I've taught an awful lot of other things as well in my time, and now I do supply. So my last job was teaching drama at a girls' grammar school, which was well outside my comfort zone, but was enjoyable in spite of all that. And there's a very different relationship between a teacher of drama in a drama studio or in an assembly hall where there is no desk, no writing, no books, no pens, none of those kind of structures or crutches that are usually used. And I found it was a great way to get the girls to open up about what they'd done during previous lessons. And we had discussions like the ones I've just outlined. I was comparing some maths lesson on volume to a tube. I said, no, it's easy. It's just like, think of your tube Pringles. They've got these little mini Pringle packets in their lunchbox. Oh yes, sometimes it will take more than one person to get to that level of understanding, and it's a long and complex road, and it takes an awful lot of time. I have no answers in terms of how you integrate that into any health system, private or public, I'm afraid. But I nevertheless am pretty well certain now, after 25 years as a customer of yours, that this, as far as chronic pain goes, will be the urgent sort of need for the next 20 years going forward. If anyone's going to get a handle on this epidemic, we're not going to start immediately taking everybody off the opioids that we were telling them were the best thing that we could give them for the last 20 years. We're not even, it takes time to train people in self-management techniques, and not all people are receptive to that. In fact, I would argue that to be a successful self-manager, you have to, it's almost like a religious conversion, a Damascus Road experience. You have to have that sense of agency first and foremost. It's not actually something that a pain specialist can tell you to do. It depressed me no end when the Times, earlier this year, and all the tabloids and broadsheets, posted similar headlines about how GPs were now being urged to prescribe music therapy and art classes and gardening to their patients rather than pills. Well, yeah, great, absolutely, but not as a prescription, not as it's me again, I'm the expert, here's now what you need to do to get better, here's now what you need to do to manage your pain. No, I'm afraid that is totally off the table as far as I'm concerned, and as far as most of the pain patients that I talk to are concerned. And that's a paradigm shift of immense proportions, isn't it?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Tim, you wanted to say something?
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to, a quick point to start with. Metaphors can be very helpful, but they can also be quite damaging, depending on what images we leave with patients about their pain and conditions. I was going to talk really about pain scores and how I never use them in certainly managing chronic pain. When we do acute pain, we usually ask people, and we did originally have a 5-point scale. I think we had a 10-point scale, it went out to 5 points, and we ended up with a 4-point scale, which was none, mild, moderate, severe. And usually we'd explain that to patients by saying, you know, if you've got no pain, that's okay. Mild pain probably means you don't need anything for it. It's there, but it's not a trouble. Moderate means if you've got something that's not going to make me as sick as a dog, I'll have it, but otherwise forget it. Severe means I'll have anything, just give it to me now. So it's code for really what you need doing. It's a way of communicating that. When you come to chronic pain, I agree entirely with Jonathan that it's fairly meaningless. And I think it takes us away from the idea, the true nature of chronic pain is that it is permanent, intractable. It is something that people come to us having had it for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, etc. And it is not something that is in our power to change. So when we talk about the pain, how bad is the pain, it's not something we can do anything about in most cases. And we're certainly not going to be able to fix it. What matters is how people are coping with it, how they're feeling about it. So the sort of questions that Jonathan is bringing up, you know, tell me about your pain. How has it been? How has life been with your pain? Is much more useful than getting stuck on a figure number 1 to 10. You know, perhaps there are some circumstances and research, drug trials where perhaps you have to put a number on it, but it is for comparative purposes there may be some benefit, but generally for clinical use, I find pain scores to be of no benefit at all.
Okay. Peter.
Right. Yes, that really was I was rather thinking about is that one memory was that there used to be several years ago there was a special interest group within the Pain Society for pain measurement rather, which was long ago defunct for fairly obvious reasons. But it seems to me I confess some ignorance of the subject that one of the possibly useful functions of pain measurement is for quantitative research, and I have long believed that it's very difficult to apply any sort of quantitative research to chronic pain, and that really only qualitative research is apposite. But it used to be the case, and I'd be interested to know whether from anybody who knows more about the subject, whether it used to be the case that it was very difficult to get qualitative research published. And I'd be interested to know whether it's still very difficult, whether it's still necessary to put numbers on things to get them published.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Yeah, I just pop one of my ideas in here. I find that when I was working as a GP, that people often came in with their own metaphors. They say the pain was burning, or that it was stabbing, or it was like a lead weight on their back. So people would come in with that stuff. And I mean, I used hypnosis quite a bit, and you can utilize, so you can ask them, what color is your pain? Now, the rational mind says, don't be ridiculous, pain hasn't got a color, but they'll tell you what color it is, what temperature it's like, what's the texture. And then you can say, okay, so I wonder what it would have to change to. If it's red, what would the color have to change to make it more comfortable? Was what we used to say, not to say to make it go away, because that becomes impossible to believe. And they would always know what color it had to go to, and they would know what texture would have to change to, and the temperature. Sometimes it was cold, and sometimes it was hot. But anyway, so in the hypnotic trance, you could allow them to just gently transform the pain. So I wouldn't have thought it was terribly helpful to have an image that you show them to choose. I mean, I don't know whether that was what you were thinking, Jonathan. I think Deborah Padfield did a study where she had pictures of pain, and I think it's better to have the patient generate their own metaphor, and then to generate their own healing metaphor. What would have to happen to enable you to change that. And I mean, I had one lady with phantom hand pain. I probably bored people with this story before. And I said, so what would have to happen for us to ease your pain? And she said it was blue liquid coming out of the top of her head, streaming down her body, going over the missing part of her hand. And it was soothing, cooling, easing, smoothing. She had all these words. So I just took some notes before we did it, and then we just did that. And she came off all the medication. So I think using imagery and metaphor, but patient-generated, seems to me what worked. And really listening, what are they trying to tell you? But anyway, yep.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
mean, just to briefly go back to Tim's point and then pick up on yours, Maureen. I couldn't agree more. I should have made it absolutely abundantly clear when I started that I was really only talking about chronic pain, because that's actually, apart from all the broken bones and accidents, that's been my lifelong experience. And this, my kind of analysis of it, such as it was, only pertains as far as chronic pain is concerned. There are, I would imagine, when you're wheeled into A&E, it probably could be very useful to be asked on a scale of 1 to 10 how much it hurts, and it could lead to very quick and efficient immediate treatment. So yeah, that's great. And yeah, just Maureen's point is, again, I wouldn't advocate any one of these things. Some of the projects that I've been involved in have had an absolute sort of multiplicity of different artistic responses, but I think the key word there is artistic. They are completely personal expressions of something that words otherwise can't express.
Yeah. It's lovely how people have got that ability to have their own metaphorical. Anyway, sorry, Jonathan, want to come back?
Yeah, Tim, returning to the question of sort of Wittgenstein and what is speech for and speech act. It seems obvious to me that people use a certain language of pain when they're talking to friends or family and doctors, and often you talk about pain with your doctor in a different way than you do to your family. Your family, maybe your aim may be sympathy or relief of duties, or you may want to present a sort of stoical position. It's the same pain, but your doctor, you may be there wanting a fit note or an increase in your medication or a referral to a specialist pain clinic. So the purpose of the language of pain depends on the audience, and then is further changed by the response that you have. And I just wondered, in your own experience, do you have any examples of how you alter the language and the metaphors that you use according to whether it's your GP or your rheumatologist or your pain specialist or your next door neighbour?
No, other than that I'm a disclaimer, having just spoken about it for the last half an hour plus, having written a book about it, having been elected to the BPS Patient Voice Committee, and having been a lived experience trainer on different training programs about it. This seems a ridiculous thing to say, but I'm very much in the denial school, and was and have been and am still, as far as that can go. I won't. This is the interesting thing. Even the words that I'm about that I'm trying to form have connotations that I'm not awfully keen on admitting to. But I think, in answer to your question, I try to be as straightforwardly factually accurate as it is possible in clinical consultations, and I try to be a head in the sand ostrich as far as social and family situations are concerned. I had a friend who had a friend of a friend who was a Christian Scientist, and I think they do the same kind of thing: deny all the reality of physical pain, and meditate on, I don't know what they meditate on, but they meditate on higher things until the sensation is under control. The sensation which they won't admit to existing is under control. I tend towards a very amateur version of that in my daily life. Does that answer the question, Jonathan?
In many ways it's a brilliant answer. We had a terrific presentation on disability studies and philosophy from a guy last year, and I forget his name annoyingly.
Oh, Tom Shakespeare.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he said we have a language of disability activism, and then we have our private language where the suffering comes out. Yeah.
The only thing I would add is that, yeah, you do. I mean, in patient groups, it's often the case that there is a degree of honesty, which is actually counterproductive because people talk about pains. And then it's what I was kind of hinting of when I was talking about that Amazonian tribe. There is some sense, some mystical sense in which the words we use can create the sensations we feel, can define the reality that or create the rules of the game, to put it in Wittgensteinian terms, that we're playing. And our projects that I was involved in, there were several people on the group who found they couldn't cope with the constant need to challenge their own experience of pain and express it in some way. They found that increased, the sensations they were feeling and made life more uncomfortable, and withdrew from the projects as a result, which is again, as I think, interesting perspective. I think I must divorce the academic and the personal in a way, because I was fascinated by the artistic challenge of expressing my pain. I really did rise to that challenge, and I'm still rising to it. And it's still very much a work in progress, and I see it also almost a lifetime's work in progress. But on a personal level, in terms of getting on with the day-to-day living, going out to work, doing the shopping, make sure the kids are out the door in good time in the morning, that happens, even if it happens through gritted teeth, without any admission on my part of any of the discomfort. Maybe that shows a level of control, self management, which I've developed over the years as well. I don't know, but yeah, it's a bit of a contradictory answer, I'm afraid.
No, it's a great answer. There's a Rumpelstiltskin effect about the transformative effect of labeling things, which we needn't go into now, but I'm sure you know that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Sarah. Oh,
Yep. Hello.
Right,
Yes.
you're there. Yeah, there you
Sorry.
are.
So I was just really wanting to just explore, I suppose, with him and more widely along the lines of what you've just said about the power of distraction, and clearly one's mindset to be getting on with things, life going on, focus. And obviously you are still in pain, but there is a part of your brain that refuses to accept, that it's going to interrupt, the daily needs of your life and the family. So, and then the other comment that I was thinking of earlier was really a sort of a question to you, Tim, as well as the wider group here, because I think we've often discussed placebo effects and the impact of the therapeutic relationship, which you've alluded to very powerfully, being key to the placebo effect. It's the power of care. But there was a fascinating study, I think, by the late Michael Mosley, who set up a study on a placebo trial with chronic back pain patients in Liverpool. And the study was very much geared towards patients who were given this capsule by empathic clinicians and rather perfunctory clinicians. And indeed, they managed to show a 48% worthwhile placebo effect, which was captured on functional benefits for each patient who kept a video diary of their improvements, for having had an empathic doctor versus I think the standard 28%, 30%, which is acknowledged to be what a placebo effect is. And of course, then they had to do the big reveal there, and patients were obviously, so there was an anxiety that they were going to feel betrayed. But it was pointed out by the psychologists who helped design the trial, Jeremy Howick, that indeed this had been an effect born of the care or the expectation or the belief that they were doing something to help themselves by taking this capsule, and they had the opportunity to continue it. And I think it was an interesting phenomenon, because I think clearly we don't tend to utilize placebos, but you can buy placebos from Amazon or whatever, and they can be different colors. And it's been found that some placebo colors are better for some people for some conditions than others. And I think in America, and I speak from an oncological perspective because that's my background, but very interested in integrative oncology and how health coaches can help patients find different methodologies that work for them, because there is never a one size fits all. And I think really it was just a question of whether those aspects of care had ever been discussed, integrated, or would you consider them? Because all of this chronicity is a question of how you use your willpower, your direction, yourself, your attention to manage your life. And indeed that can be honed sometimes by meditation for some, sometimes with hypnosis, and it's all a question of finding what works and when. But I didn't know whether people are using placebos. It seems to be a sort of interesting theory, but again, not in practice.
Thank you.
Gosh. Yeah, never knowingly taken any placebos, but I saw the same program. It was fascinating, wasn't it? I mean, even the chap in the wheelchair on the boat. He realised that he'd been taking the placebo, wanted to continue taking them. I have seen some stuff as well. Sorry, guys, I can't point you in the direction of it, but you probably know them anyway, that have recorded some evidence that there is a molecular change when patients take, even when they take placebos that they know in advance are placebos, there is still that habituation. Because I mean, it all comes back to the brain being a predictive organ, basically, doesn't it? And the fact that it's running a program which is only altered to accommodate the sense perception that we think is the reality that we see out there. Absolutely not. We're running a kind of matrix style virtual simulacrum of what we think is out there. And the placebo, I think, can be explained in that kind of way, which is that the brain is already producing its endogenous opioids or whatever as a result of the physical act of swallowing the dummy pill.
I mean, or whether it's sort of a tactile hypnotic suggestion, that actually you're taking this to improve things for yourself, and that in its own right is a sort of enactment of a sort of a hypnotic suggestion. But I mean, I think none of us really absolutely knows, but we know it's a real phenomenon, and I think it's one of those things that we don't tend to utilize perhaps enough.
We'll just add one thing. I have never taken a placebo pill, but I have at times been prescribed opioids. I have a underlying musculoskeletal problem, so it's defined as chronic secondary pain, and occasionally does need pain medication. But they're also the kind of pills that aren't best taken on an empty stomach. And I've noticed on occasions, and I don't use this medication on a regular basis, but I have noticed on some occasions when I've been had a flare up and been on a course of opioids, that I will have, if I've not just eaten, I will have had a couple of digestive biscuits, for example, as a stomach lining, as a preparation to taking the pills. But then, an hour or two later, I find that the two pills I was about to swallow are still in my pocket, and yet I noticed that I've not taken them. Again, that kind of auto-suggestion.
It's probably the biscuits. It's the biscuits, Tim.
Oh, with magic biscuits.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer in a bit of magic.
Nothing like a digestive biscuit. Right, we tie.
While we are talking about placebo, I just really wanted to share this book with everybody. Can you see?
The Patient's Brain.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It really looked very detailed into placebo effect and the neuroscience behind what we talked about today, this evening, as well as last week, the therapeutic relationship, the power of the therapeutic relationship. It's really a very good book, and he's done a lot of research on that. So do take a look at this book. And I have no share in the book, by the way.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Any other ideas want to contribute? I was just going to say briefly about placebos. They've also shown that the more dramatic the actual placebo, like if you give an injection or if you have to give a general anesthetic and then the treatment or the dummy treatment, it's much more powerful. And I can't remember what colours the pills have to be for sleeping, for anxiety, or for pain. It's all very relevant. It has a profound. But apparently, things that people put in their tea, sweeteners, actually raise your blood sugar. Because they're not supposed to, because there isn't any sugar in there. But the brain must predict it from the taste. So it's all very interesting. Rita, you want to say something else, or you still got your hand up? You're muted.
Okay, the color of the pills make a huge difference, and the book is actually the book that I just talked about. Actually detailed some experiment
about that.
On, like red color is really not a good color to use, so please don't use red color
for
unless
anything.
you want to
Right.
unless you want to scare the hell out of your patients.
Oh, all right then. Okay, thank you. Sam, do you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can't see you.
No, you can't, because for some reason my iPad is not picking up. It's not using the video, but I'm just sitting in my kitchen, so it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
I'm glad you can't see. So yes, Tim, thanks so much. That was fabulous, your whole talk, and the discussion that's followed after as well. I need to pick your brains about the Amazonian people sometime. I particularly want to ask about them, because you described how they don't seem to have tenses. They don't have a future or a past tense. It's just what's happening now. They're sort of living in the moment. Do they ever have chronic pain? Can they, if they can't refer back to previous episodes or the experience of maybe having more pain, the same as they've had now? So I'm just wondering, has that been described? I don't suppose they're being studied from a sort of a biological point of view, but how would they process chronic versus acute pain?
It's fascinating, and I will endeavour to find out. I mean, obviously the research is ongoing. It's kind of a lifelong sort of ethnographical study by David Everett, and if you are interested, I'll send you a link to a couple of his books. But I mean, it's the way their language seems to shape their reality, and that they have no, they don't conjugate verbs. They have nothing of the kind of the natural linguistic expressions that we take to be reflections of our reality. And although they do get sick, as I said, their population has only just started to recover from being decimated is the wrong word to use, because it was more than 1 in 10, but quite severely depleted as a result of a measles outbreak 5 or 6 years ago. They do get sick, they are ill, but they, as far as Everett seems to have observed and understands, they deal with it as a very matter-of-fact moment-to-moment phenomenon. They don't seem to have any concept of there being cause and effect, which is why obviously, as a totally isolated Amazonian tribe, they've not had to, I would imagine, thousands of years of evolution have developed their immunity to any local pathogens, and it's only the introduction of new sort of Western ones that has caused them recent outbreaks of sickness and disease.
Yeah. But I guess they also still have injuries. They have trauma, which
Yes.
yeah. No, but my point was, leaving aside the linguistics of the Amazonian tribe, I was a bit disappointed when you said your talk. You suddenly said, "Oh, this talk is really about chronic pain, not really about acute pain," because I was thinking I've always had this problem about the distinction. To some extent, it's purely arbitrary. You know, if it's been more than 3 months, it's now chronic. If we've got an explanation, which we know is a condition that will carry on, oh, it's a chronic pain. It's either chronic secondary or primary. And we've long been talking about, dividing up pain as acute, chronic, and then people who know me know I'm going to say this, and then there's cancer pain, as if somehow it's biologically different. But if you understand cancer, and I've worked in it all my life, it's basically acute pain or chronic pain, but the causes at different times may be related to cancer or nothing. It may be related to the treatments of cancer. So I just wanted to sort of say, just because you're talking very much, you explained beautifully how the words we use or the words we can't use also sometimes influence how our experiences are perceived by others. In your case, as a patient with a doctor, or even just we as doctors talking sometimes together, even use the use of the word chronic pain to me really rankles, because it's an arbitrary distinction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mea culpa. I kind of wanted to just distinguish between that and, obviously, as a non-scientist, non-clinician, my terms are very crude here, but between that and the obvious pain of an injury, say, or immediately caused by some sort of disease.
Yeah. I'm not blaming you, Tim. And by the way, having worked in chronic pains for many years, including chronic sickle cell pain with acute crises, I think you can measure them both verbally or numerically. Patients can do that. I don't think there's a distinction.
Okay, good. Peter, you want to say something? You muted, Peter.
Sam, if I could refer you to a talk which John Loza gave sometime last year on a new terminology of pain, in which he rejected this sort of temporal definition of chronic pain in favor of, I think the terms he used were peripheral and central and centralized. I can't remember exactly what he said, but you can find his talk on the in our website in the transcriptions of his webinar. It was a new definition of pain, a new system of definition of pain by John Loza. So you might find that interesting.
Okay. Great. Thanks. Rita, you got your hand up?
Really a very personal question for Tim, related to the notion of we are the story we tell ourselves, because I'm a big proponent of that, not only in the pain arena, but also in other areas where I work in. Have you ever tried to change your own narrative about pain? It's really a very personal question. I'm sorry to have to ask you this, but I'm really very interested as someone who works with pain. And if you did it make any difference? This is a qualitative research question.
Yes, and yes are the quick answers, but I kind of it's something I do all the time. I change the story almost daily and adapt it to different situations, and it does make a difference. I do agree, which I think you were driving at with the second part of the question, that how you talk, that internal sort of monologue, makes a big difference to what.
And that relates to the linguistic aspect of your talk.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. And just pulling focus on some of the standard rather than saying I'm in pain, I have a pain in a particular location. Just try to depersonalize some of it. I find sometimes works. Well, it helps, shall we say? Yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay. Well, we're right on 9 o'clock. So if anybody has got one more burning urgent question, or if Tim wants to make another comment, we are still all here hanging on your every word. So
I'd only just say thank you, everybody, for A, listening, and B,
do that.
for such
Thank you.
afterwards. It was
No,
absolutely
it's been
amazing.
good. It's been fun, hasn't it? Yeah, everybody's really, really interested in it. Okay, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Tim.
Cheerio. Bye now.